My name is Alfred White, and I'm the founder of the League of Extraordinary People, and my focus is the root causes of gun violence. And so, like many other issues within our community today, like reparations, part of our problem with gun violence starts with the policymakers who must address the social and economic inequalities that are the impacted root cause of gun impacted communities of color. The root causes of gun violence include income inequality, poverty, underfunded public housing, under-resourced public service, underperforming schools, lack of opportunity and perceptions of hopelessness, easy access to firearms for high-risk people. Communities of color are impacted by structural inequalities rooted in racism. The inequalities that fuel gun violence are caused by racist policies that target communities of color and create segregated and underinvested neighborhoods. Black Americans are more likely to live in hyper-segregated, poor neighborhoods with underfunded social services, less economic opportunities, and limited health care access than white Americans. Many disadvantaged neighborhoods face a number of ongoing challenges, including the shortage of affordable housing, inadequate infrastructure, wealth inequality, and poverty. The unemployment rate for black Americans is at least twice as high as that of white Americans in many U.S. cities. In addition to underqualified instructors, high-poverty urban schools face problems of outdated curriculum, dilapidated facilities which impact students' developmental outcomes. Firearm violence is highly concentrated within impacted communities of color. Nearly 60% of firearm homicide victims in the United States are black Americans, yet black Americans account for less than 18% of the population. Gun violence is the leading cause of death for black males under the age of 55 and the second leading cause of death for Hispanic males under the age of 34. Young black males 15 to 24 are 23 times more likely to be murdered by firearm than their white counterparts, and young Hispanic males are over 4 times more likely to be murdered by firearms than their white counterparts. Young black females 15 to 24 are nearly 7 times more likely to be murdered by firearms than their white counterparts, and young Hispanic females are nearly 2 times more likely to be murdered by firearms than their white counterparts. In 2015, 26% of firearm homicides in the U.S. occurred within the urban census tracts that contain only 1.5% of the population. Here's something else. In many communities of color, nearly everyone is impacted by gun violence. A 2013 study found that among black Americans, the likelihood of having someone within their social network die by a firearm at some point during their lifetime was 95.5%. A survey of the Baltimore City youth ages 12 to 24 found that 42% had witnessed a shooting compared to 4% of suburban youth. A survey of middle school children in Richmond, Virginia public school system found that 94% reported hearing gunshots and 44% of boys and 30% of girls reported witnessing a shooting. Here's something real important. Gun violence exposure changes the chemistry in the brain and can have lasting impacts on health, well-being, and development if left untreated. Exposure to gun violence is associated with, they say, post-traumatic stress disorder, but actually it's complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which stems from slavery. The original sin was slavery, you guys. And so we've never addressed that about our physiology and our neurobiology. So also, too, is antisocial behavior, depression, stunted cognitive and emotional development, risky alcohol and substance use, increased likelihood engaging in violence. Widespread community exposure to gun violence exacerbates already existing social and economic inequalities and further perpetuates gun violence. A study that examined 500 black American youth found that direct exposure to violence was the best predictor of whether an individual would later engage in gun-related crimes. Analysis of gun violence in Oakland found that each gun homicide in a census tract in a given year was related to 5 fewer job opportunities in the subsequent year. An analysis of gun violence in D.C. found that 10 additional gunshots in the census tract in a given year was linked to 1 less new business opening and 1 more business closing and 20 fewer jobs. In closing, gun violence is a multifaceted challenge that demands a holistic set of solutions to the cycles of daily gun violence in impacted communities of color. In addition to limiting access limiting easy access to firearms by high-risk people, we must address the underlying social and economic inequalities that fuel gun violence and adequately fund community-based violence prevention and intervention efforts that build authentic relationships within those impacted, and also support local organizations that address the social and economic inequalities at the root of gun violence. And this was a research study developed by the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence. Thank you. My name is Alfred White.